Do you know the Nazi theory of the Superman? Well, how many Nazi hierarchs exactly reflected or even approached the ideal of Superman? Practically none. Think about Hitler, short, dark-haired, not very handsome, in fact, and with some physical problems inherited at a young age from his paternal and maternal genetic makeup. Think about Goering, a monstrously obese fat man with a physique ruined by the abuse of alcohol, food, but also drugs. Or think about Himmler, the myopic SS chief with a chubby face, absolutely not the prototype of the Aryan Superman. Or think about the man to whom Adolf Hitler had entrusted the delicate task of internal propaganda to convince every man and woman in Germany that the National Socialist Revolution was the only method to steer Germany beyond the shoals of the Weimar Republic, and that dictatorship, after all, was just a price to pay for greatness. Joseph Goebbels was also born with problems. He has clubfoot, which means that the sole of the foot is not exactly at 90 degrees to the bones of the leg. He tends to lean more on the front part of the foot, like horses, which rest their paw on the front part of the nail. And this problem that is exacerbated more and more with the passing of the years, but also with the disease osteomyelitis, which prevents him from participating in the Great War. Being enrolled in the conscription list will cause him to limp more and more visibly for the rest of his life, to the point, every now and then, of having to lean on laws or sticks. Therefore, it cannot be said that even Joseph Goebbels could be the prototype of the Germanic Superman. Yet this young man, born in 1897 in what is now Rhineland, became one of Hitler's closest collaborators after being one of the fiercest critics. In the beginning, he became famous mainly for a phrase attributed to him. Repeat a lie 1, 2, 5, 10, 100, 1,000 times, and this lie will become truth, whether he said it or he didn't say it. Goebbels' philosophy has always been this: tell your own version, repeat it endlessly until your listener is perfectly convinced. Even if it's a lie, it doesn't matter. Goebbels made his career mainly after the war, spending the period of the Great War studying at the gymnasium and high school, while other hierarchs, future hierarchs of the Nazi Party like Hitler, Goering, but also Rudolf Hess fought on the battlefields. He, at school, that clubfoot did not allow him to enlist. And when the Imperial Germany collapses with the November 1918 revolution, with the proclamation of the first Soviets, the Bavarian Communist Republic that is suppressed in blood, among the corps, the armed Germans returned home from the front, who do not take off their uniform, but rather massacre their fellow citizens who have embraced communism. In this period of enormous confusion, the young Joseph Goebbels takes refuge in politics. And it's a precise politics, a precise choice. That of nationalism, a driven nationalism that pushes him, excuse the pun, to listen to the speeches of the most fiery speakers at these rallies. He meets very important people. One of these is Erich Ludendorff, a famous name. Erich Ludendorff is one of the great imperial generals who has kept his reputation intact. Even in spite of some defeats, Ludendorff, along with Paul von Hindenburg, is considered by the Germans as a sort of living myth. And especially Ludendorff, he aspires to enter politics and play a role in the Weimar Republic, which has replaced the German Empire. Other new friends that the young Joseph Goebbels makes are Julius Streicher, another passionate nationalist-style speaker, and the Strasser brothers, all people who gravitate around a tiny party born in Bavaria, the German Workers' Party, which quickly becomes the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. But if the core of the Nazi Party is in Munich, Bavaria, Joseph Goebbels, along with Georg Strasser, prefers to work in Berlin, a big city, a metropolis with perhaps even heavier problems than those of Munich. Berlin is an extremely cosmopolitan city, within which both the aspirations of the old nobility, who would like to restore the privileges of the past, and the aspirations of the classes are simmering, lower, more modest, of workers who initially look sympathetically at the Soviet Revolution. Berlin is a complex city with various social classes, including the bourgeoisie, petite bourgeoisie, and middle bourgeoisie. And it is here that Goebbels begins to engage in politics, writing in newspapers, because Goebbels, initially as a journalist, he mainly deals with politics, and he does it from the pages of a newspaper, a weekly, exactly the Völkische Freiheit, which initially has a liberal imprint and then strongly conservative. But the nationalist sympathies of the young Goebbels are too much for the editorial staff of the Völkische Freiheit, who after a while fire him. This is because Goebbels begins to write articles about the funds of the Elseviers, in which he says, "We Germans are nothing. Germany is everything." It almost seems like hearing the notes of the German anthem Deutschland über alles in der Welt, Germany above all in the world. There is this desire for redemption, but perhaps even worse, what he will have called revanchism, the desire to take revenge, a backlash against the French who have defeated, along with the English and Americans, the Imperial Germany. French who have imposed exorbitant war reparations with the economy going downhill, French who occupy the Ruhr, the German industrial area to the west, to have guarantees on war damage payments. During that period, while in Munich, the beer hall putsch is taking place, and we have already talked about it. Goebbels has a completely different approach, an approach we could say almost progressive within the Nazi Party. It's the most radical wing, the revolutionary one, the almost proletarian one, which is embodied by Georg Strasser, and who looks sympathetically at the infantry captain, Ernst Römer, who became the founder of the Sturmabteilung and the main instigator of street riots. While Hitler is in prison sentenced to fortress arrest for the beer hall putsch, Goebbels writes to various delegates of the Nazi Party and asks that Hitler be marginalized. After all, the first electoral results of the Nazi Party are extremely modest. Only 9 deputies. Little, very little. The choice to support Erich Ludendorff in the race for the presidency of the Weimar Republic is disastrous. Hindenburg, Ludendorff's old rival friend, overwhelmingly wins the elections and becomes president of the Reich. Ludendorff loses and also loses face. After being released from prison, Hitler publicly denounces him, calling him a complete disaster, not just politically. Hitler, released from prison, also decides to settle scores with that young man who would want him out of the party in Berlin. After all, Goebbels is a manipulator. He has good relations with the press. He knows how to move in the world of communication. But towards Hitler, he initially feels a sense of inferiority, also because Hitler, in the meantime, has equipped himself with a press office. Not bad for being the leader of a still rather small party. Behind Hitler is a top-level publicist and publisher like Ernst Aufstengel, and a small rivalry begins between Aufstengel and Goebbels. A small rivalry made up of political positions, ideas, proposals, and electoral campaigns. The one orchestrated by Goebbels, starting from 1929 as a campaign for a democratic rise to power, convinces Hitler. The results begin to show. Election after election, the Nazi Party gained seats. Not only did Goebbels have Hitler's trust, for a very delicate role, that of Gauleiter of Berlin. What does Gauleiter mean? He is the head of a region. Then, during the dictatorship, he will essentially become the substitute for the mayor. The Gauleiter is in charge of the Nazi Party section in a Gau, that is, a region or a province. Well, Goebbels is given the responsibility of Berlin, that cosmopolitan city so problematic, a city that Hitler would like to conquer, electorally speaking, despite considering it a red city that is full of socialists and communists, his bitter opponents not only in the voting booth but also on the streets. Well, Goebbels' chatter, his ideas, which tease and fascinate the working class, earn the Nazi Party more and more support. So much so that the National Socialist German Workers' Party gains votes. many votes in Berlin, more and more, until it reaches the threshold of the 30s when the National Socialist German Workers' Party is almost mature enough to govern. It has a nice slice of the Reichstag parliament. And when Hitler obtains the coveted chancellorship, sidelining all of President von Hindenburg's candidates, but also expelling Georg Strasser from the party, who has become extremely inconvenient. It's Goebbels' triumph who gets the role of Minister of Propaganda from his seat in the Reichstag as early as 1928. Goebbels studies the audience, understands which parties to talk to. He addresses the party of industrialists, the party of former monarchists, all the parties that make up the most conservative and nationalist area. He proposes to them to work for Adolf Hitler, to bring Hitler to rule over Germany. And when Hitler, using the pretext of the Reichstag fire, obtains full powers to then liquidate the old movement wing, that of Ernst Röhm, in the Night of the Long Knives. And we have already talked about it in another video that I invite you to watch again. Goebbels, Himmler, and Goering are by his side. All the components of what will become Adolf Hitler's cabinet as chancellor are there, and in that cabinet, Joseph Goebbels has a very delicate task, that of Minister of Propaganda. It is he who provokes strong but sympathetic reactions towards the dictator in the German who listens to the radio. He suggests to the German the need for a strong voice, a clear, authoritative, even violent voice. If it's needed to guide Germany, that Germany immersed in terrible chaos, the one following the Great War. Not only does Goebbels lash out against everything that does not reflect Germany at a social, scientific, and cultural level. Goebbels is an anti-Semite. Goebbels is an anti-communist. Goebbels is against so-called degenerate art, figurative art, futurist art, Dadaist art. The art of Gauguin, the art of Picasso are all degenerate artists. Not only Goebbels, there's death with Freemasonry. He does everything so that Himmler includes a department within the newly born Gestapo that persecutes the Freemasons, who are considered terrible enemies for the new dictatorial state because they do not bow to the single voice. In short, Joseph Goebbels becomes a man behind Hitler, the one who whispers in his ear the ideas for the new press campaigns, and the one who receives his confidences and directs them towards the megaphone of propaganda. And when the war breaks out, on September 1, 1939, Goebbels becomes the man of the microphone, the man who manages all the communication of the Reich, steering it in one direction, the search for the ultimate victory. For what? To achieve what Hitler calls living space, what Germany needs to prosper, that bright future that had already been foreseen in Mein Kampf, written in prison by Hitler, and which becomes a sort of constant manifesto of the dictatorship. To do all this, Goebbels spares no expense, after all. He practically has full power over all media. Not only is he extremely brilliant because he recognizes the talent of film actors, directors like Riefenstahl, but not only that, also of radio speakers who come from abroad. This is the case with William Joyce, Lord Ho-Ho, Mr. Schinyaz, an English trader who, fascinated by the idea of Nazism, moved to Germany and put himself at the service of the Nazi dictatorship. Lord Ho-Ho is one of the leading anchors of the Reich's radio programs. But Goebbels is not satisfied with this. Goebbels has a say in every matter. Goebbels is an extremely feared man within the Third Reich. So much so that when the Wehrmacht officers who want to rebel against Hitler begin to plan the dictator's assassination, they include him in the list of personalities to be killed, or, in case of impossibility of assassination, to be arrested and imprisoned for life. Joseph Goebbels is not present at the Hostenberg meeting on July 20th, 1944, in the Wolfschanze. When Colonel Count von Stauffenberg detonated his briefcase with that plastic explosive, he wasn't there. Goebbels was at Berlin, contacts the Wolf's Lair from his residence and learns that Hitler is alive, being one of the first to know. And it's Goebbels who, when the commander of the Grossdeutschland battalion Major Otto Riemer goes to arrest him on the orders of von Stauffenberg. It's Goebbels who turns the front around. He gets Riemer to talk to Hitler on the phone, convinces him, makes him understand that Hitler is alive and that the conspiracy is not from the SS but from the Wehrmacht officers. He is persuasive, extremely persuasive. And he has another quality that Hitler likes more and more, especially after July 20th, 1944. He is loyal. While Goering starts to think about himself, his own skin, the wealth he has accumulated by looting across Europe, looking for ways to oust Bormann from the government and take control of the Reich, while Himmler, in the last days of the war, tries everything to convince the Swedish Count Bernadotte to initiate peace talks with the Allies. Goebbels is by Hitler's side. He's with him in the Führer bunker under the Chancellery in Berlin, and he has brought his wife and children into the bunker because he believes that there could still be hope for the Third Reich. It's him who, upon hearing the news of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's death, a death that, sooner or later, had to occur because the President of the United States still bore the signs of polio on himself. It's him who goes beaming to Hitler to tell him, "My Führer, the Tsarina is dead," recalling what had happened to Frederick II in Prussia in his war against the Tsar, and to the fact that the death of the Tsar's wife, the Tsarina, who hated Prussia, turned the front around. Goebbels, locked in the bunker, reads Frederick II's memoirs to Hitler every evening, who is fascinated by them. In some ways, we could say that he is also partially subjugated by them. He is convinced that something will happen, something miraculous. And like Hitler, Goebbels is also convinced of the existence and imminent arrival of the Wunderwaffe, the miraculous weapons promised by Hitler in a speech to the troops in Zaporizhia in February 1943, and that, after 2 years, however, are still not seen. Too few have been seen to really turn the war around. Goebbels remains in the bunker until the end. Goering has escaped. Himmler has escaped. Many others have tried to escape, like Fegelein, the husband of Eva Braun's sister, chased to Charlottenburg, brought back and shot. Goebbels never thought of escaping. Goebbels remains. He remains even after, on the afternoon of April 30, 1945, Hitler took his own life and first killed his lover and newlywed wife, Eva Braun. Even though in Adolf Hitler's political testament the named successor is essentially Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, Goebbels would still have a role in what remains of the Third Reich, but he refuses it. On the evening of May 1, 1945, at 8 o'clock, Joseph Goebbels decides to end his life. Not alone, he follows the example of his Führer. He had already convinced his wife to make a clean sweep. He gets from the SS doctor, Helmut Kuntz, vials of morphine with which he drugs his children put to bed. Then the Goebbels spouses kill their children by breaking cyanide capsules in their mouths. Finally, Joseph Goebbels, the man with the club foot, the man who limped, the man who was everything, except for the Germanic Superman, the man who screamed into the microphone, the man who whispered in Hitler's ear, the man who repeated the lies, 1,000 times to convince the listener that it was reality. Joseph Goebbels shoots his wife and then turns the revolver on himself. Like his dictator, he too had arranged for the cremation of the bodies. He doesn't want the Soviets, now very close to the Chancellery, or what remains of the Chancellery, to be able to display the bodies, as happened a few days earlier in Milan by the partisans. For Mussolini and Cloretta Petacci, he wants there to be no trace left.
On the other hand,
the 1,000-year Reich was supposed to last 1,000 years, but if not, it was to self-destruct, as Hitler had ordered Albert Speer, another one whom Hitler had trusted, but who in the end decided to go his own way. Not to destroy everything, not to turn Germany into a field of ash. The bodies of Joseph Goebbels, his wife, and his children are burned in the courtyard of the Chancellery, but they are not burned well enough. They char. It's a struggle. To recognize their identity anyway, orthodontic records are needed to try to trace back to the identity of those completely burned bodies. Those corpses are buried anyway. And in 1970, once modern DNA tests provide a reasonable certainty about the identity of those corpses, the Soviets will proceed to exhume them, cremate them, and scatter them as ashes in the Elbe River. A way, perhaps too merciful, to bid farewell to the man who wanted to be the dictator's megaphone, the man who suggested the worst atrocities to the dictator, the man with the clubfoot, the deformed man who, if he had not been a personal friend of the dictator and his collaborator, perhaps in the name of that deformity, would have paid a very high price, as had happened to so many other unfortunate Germans, and not in Action T4. The man who represented a living contradiction between wanting to be absolute perfection and representing the greatest human tragedy and its most tragic imperfection.